President-elect Donald Trump made many economic promises on the campaign trail. Joining us right now on how he might go about implementing those. Steve Mnuchin is here. He's the former Treasury Secretary during President Trump's first term, currently managing partner at Liberty Strategic Capital. And we're grateful to have you on the broadcast this morning. Steve, help us understand what you think is possible, what's not possible, what can be done perhaps through executive actions and what is going to need both the Senate and the House, and how you think some of those issues play out.
Well, obviously, we're very excited about what the economic plan is going to look like. And my expectation is it's a large extension of many of the great success that President Trump achieved in the first term. The top priority, I would suggest, is extending the Trump tax cuts, signature part of his program. I think that should be easy to pass in Congress, particularly if the Republicans control the House as well, which it looks like it will be. The second thing is I would make sure that all the sanctions are restored. The sanctions on Iran and Russia were very impactful. In the case of Iran, they're now selling millions of barrels of oil, which needs to be stopped. And the third part is reenacting his trade agenda. I think that tariffs do need to be used to get counterparties back to the table, especially China, which is not living up to all of the agreements they made in the Phase 1 trade agreement.
Right. I want to get to the tariffs in a moment, but I want to start back with the tax piece for just a second. Extending that and making the tax cuts that you folks implemented permanent clearly is a priority. The question I'd ask is, how much does that get even adjusted from here, which is to say that the president-elect now has suggested a corporate tax rate not just of 21%, but possibly 15%. Will that just be for now? Of course, the questions become, is that just going to be for folks who manufacture here in the U.S.? Is it going to be restricted to certain types of companies? Is it for everybody? How do you see that piece of this playing out? And to the extent that there are going to be folks in the Republican Party who might say, you know, we have to balance our budgets. We have to be careful about some of these things. Some of the tax giveaways that he's also talked about, for example, you know, no tax on tips and other types of things. Do you think that there's going to be a debate about these issues?
Well, 15% was our goal last time. We couldn't get it there. I mean, my suggestion is, as President Trump has said, if the corporate tax is going to be lowered, it should be lowered in a way that supports U.S. manufacturing and U.S. jobs, as opposed to across the board. I think your comment about deficits and spending is an important comment. I think that the debt to GDP ratio is way too high. When we were in office, it was 100%, and we were going to a path of paying debt down on a faster rate than we were increasing GDP. And I think that spending is definitely going to be an issue. You see the backup in the 10-year Treasury in the markets, and I think that it's something that needs to be looked at.
Steve, so many old sacred cows of the Republican Party seem to be at least being modified or changing. And you just mentioned what I would consider to be almost industrial policy, and that's having a different tax rate for things that are made here. Don't you think there's always unintended consequences? Do we throw out comparative advantage completely? Don't you think that there are certain things that, I mean, here you've got the government more or less doing something Democrats like to do with the CHIPS Act. They're picking the winners and losers in the private economy, which never, ever works. But suddenly it's okay for Republicans to really be proposing industrial policy, almost central planning.
Well, I think we definitely don't want central planning, and we definitely don't want the government picking winners and losers. Well, what I would say is the trade agenda for a long period of time has not worked. And the reason is, you know, even if you believe in free trade, we don't have free and fair trade. We have one-sided trade. If you look at China, our markets have been completely open to them on investment and trade, and their markets have been closed. And we always said, if we could open their markets, their middle class, to U.S. companies, that would be a terrific opportunity. So I think that the economic policy just needs to be used to create a level playing field.
Stephen, when you think about the tariff piece of all of this, though, there are questions about how inflationary that would be. There's also questions, by the way, about how potentially even more tax cuts could be inflationary. I know the effort is to offset some of that with, for example, lower gas prices. But we also had folks like Darren Woods from Exxon on, and we were talking about the market forces and how, if you're in that business, you don't want gas prices to go down too much. And so how this balance is going to be achieved?
Well, look, you comment on energy policy, and I think energy policy is absolutely critical because it also ties to our national security. And you're right. If you look at crude, which you have on the screen at like $71,
yep,
crude could go down to $65, and it would still be profitable for a lot of businesses in the U.S. to be able to do energy. You got to remember, we also have ample amounts of LNG. LNG is a very clean alternative. We were in the process of reaching agreements to export U.S. LNG. I think that needs to be explored. So I think energy prices coming down will help inflation. I think, President Trump clearly understands inflation. I mean, you've seen in the last administration, it was clearly one of the top problems. So he understands that. We didn't have inflation. If he does tariffs, I think my recommendation that he would use them in a strategic way and make sure that we don't have inflation across the board. And again, if you look at the China tariffs, Ambassador Lighthizer and I worked very closely. He had lots of exemptions for things that were critical to U.S. businesses that they needed.
Stephen, Elon Musk has called for, quote, at least $2 trillion in cuts to federal spending. You have probably, I know, spent an extraordinary amount of time looking at the books of our government. Would you know how to begin to do that? Is that a plausible thing to do? And if so, where would you go first?
Well, I definitely support the idea of cutting government spending and particularly looking at if there's waste in the government. I think $2 trillion, if it's $2 trillion on an annual basis, that's obviously a very big goal. I think $2 trillion over time is more realistic. But I also think you have to look at entitlements. Entitlements are a big part of government spending. If you look at the Social Security Trust Fund, it's going to run out of money. This has to be addressed. So I hope these are issues that President Trump takes on in a second term, because these are really important long-term issues for the country. And I think he's in a position now, particularly with, this overwhelming result, to take on difficult issues. And I think that's got to be part of government spending.